Okay, we are.
It's good to see you.
Page 262. Second line, 2 lines to the bottom where it says Vo'ed Zois.
Yeah.
And let us recap.
I know the routine already.
You know the rules.
Routine.
The routine.
What page?
Page 262. So as I warned at the end of last week's share, we're going to have one more share, which is going to be today, and hopefully today we'll finish the major Kabbalah. Then we'll the plane will slowly descend to earth. but today, again, we do have one more class of heavy Kabbalah. We're trying to figure out the godliness which is present dira b'tachtonim here in this world. So last week we spoke about how actually, even though it would seem that Atzilus, the world of Atzilus, that's Lakus, and the worlds of Bri, Yitzir Asiya, so there isn't the light of Hashem isn't there. But we found out that no, there's the light of Hashem and that enters our world. Both the limited form of the light of Hashem and the unlimited form of light of Hashem, in many different ways. We spoke about 3 different ways. There's the light of the Kav that pierces the curtain and enters the worlds of Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya. We spoke about the light of the Kav itself as it enters through Ak, and then we spoke about the light of Sevu Klonen, which is the encompassing light. So there's plenty of Elokus in the worlds. That's what we're holding right now.
Remind us, what is Ox? It stands for?
Adam Kadmai.
That's right.
Right, okay. Now the Alter Rebbe says, is moreover, yes, Al Kain. In addition, Al Kol Anal, and everything that we mentioned earlier. What did we mention earlier? We mentioned Ha'ara. We mentioned how we have a ray of the ray of the Kav, how it's in every single creation here in this world. V'chol Hanal, and all the other different forms of godliness that enter the worlds. More than that, Himarek Koicha V'yicholta B'yisoid Ha'ofar Hagashmi. Where is the ultimate revelation of godliness in our world? Listen to this. B'yisoid Ha'ofar Hagashmi. We know that our world is comprised of 4 different elements. The physical world is comprised of 4 elements. There's Doimim, Semeach, Chai, and Medaber. Doimim is the inanimate, and there's Semeach, which is that which grows, vegetation, and Chai, the animals, and Medaber, the human beings. And that's the order. So which one is the highest one?
Yeah.
Is man. Yeah. But by now we know that the theory of Dir B'Tachtonim tells us that the highest and the greatest are always mutually exclusive terms. So where is the ultimate revelation of Hashem? In the Yisoid Ha'afar, Dafke in
dirt.
The inanimate, in earth and stones.
How did you see godliness in stones?
We'll see that in a second. But before we get to what Dr. Rebbe says in Tanya, I'll digress a little. It's that we're sitting here on Erev Shabbos, Tisha B'Av, the birthday of Mashiach, the day when we will, Shabbos is going to be a total celebration, a Yom Tov. And hopefully that will continue also on Sunday. Hopefully Mashiach will come before then. Like upon him, today when we look forward to the coming of Mashiach, the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash.
Calm down.
Relax.
Relax.
We have one baggage here.
And we find a difference between the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. That is that the Mishkan was comprised of Doimim, Semeach, and Chai. And obviously it was inhabited by Medaber, in other words the Yidden and the Kehanim. But there was Doimim. Doimim was the ground of the Mishkan, which the ground of the Mishkan also had Kedusha to it, which is why the pasuk says, "Min ha'afar asher yiyeh bekarka ha'mishkan." We take from the earth of the Mishkan and we put it into the waters of the Saita, because there's Kedusha to the earth. And then the walls were made up of Atzi Shittim, which is Tzemeach. And then what was the Mishkan covered with? It was covered with chai. It was covered with animal hides and furs. And what you see over here is that actually it's in order. That on the bottom you have doimim, which is the lowest element, and then on top of that you have the tzemeach, which is an element which is higher than that, and on top of that you have chai. The Beis Hamikdash was made up completely of doimim, all stones. And the Alter Rebbe talks about this in Mekutei Torah. The Alter Rebbe says the ultimate dir b'tachtonim is in the Beis Hamikdash more so than the Mishkan. The Mishkan was only a oil aray. There was not a permanent dwelling place for Hashem. In the permanent dwelling place for Hashem, where dir b'tachtonim is most revealed, what is it made up? Of doimim. The lowest of the low. And interestingly, there's a sikha from the Rebbe 30 years ago. And the Rebbe says, a big chiddush, he says that the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, a chiddush, by the way, which is unusual for the Rebbe. Meaning the Rebbe has a lot of questions and answers, but to come up with a statement. And the Rebbe says, you should know, not really any mucker for this, but almost like the Rebbe is telling us a fact. The Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi is going to be made up of Barzel. Barzel, which wasn't allowed in the first and second Beis Hamikdash, because it's the lowest element, because that's what swords are made out of. Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, the Rebbe says, will be made out of Barzel.
And there's no mucker for that.
There's no mucker. This is the Rebbe's chiddush. How does the Rebbe know that?
Why we should see?
But again, the point being, this idea that the Beis Hamikdash, which will be rebuilt very soon, in the ultimate dir b'tachtonim, we have it's made up of the lowest element, which is doimim, and in the lowest element itself, the lowest in doimim, which is barzel.
But somewhere it said that the Mashiach will come from Shamayim, and in one piece Hashem will send it down.
That's
So what's
that's a known question. The Rambam says that Mashiach will build the Beis Hamikdash. The other Midrashim says the Beis Hamikdash will come down from heaven, and there are those who try to reconcile between the two. The Rebbe offers a certain reconciliation. The Rebbe says that the Beis Hamikdash will come from heaven, and Mashiach and us, we will put up the doors. According to Halacha, when you put up the doors, that's the Makkah Bepatish, as if you made the whole thing. So that's the Rebbe's way of reconciling that contradiction. Yeah. But either way, wherever it comes from, the question is, what's it going to be made out of? It's definitely going to be made out of physical. It's going to be a physical Beis Hamikdash. So, but where do we see, other than what we just said, that the Beis Hamikdash is made up of doimim, but where else do we see the revelation of the Eir Saf, specifically in doimim? So the Rebbe says, let's go back inside. So again, let's do it again. The Eir Saf, the light of Hashem, shows its strength and its ability, b'yisoid ha'afar agashmi, in the physical earth. Begili, give me 1 second. Begili atzum, a tremendous revelation. B'yeser azm b'yisoidus halyonim imenu, much more so than the higher elements. V'gam mitzvah shamayim. Not only is the revelation of godliness greater in doimim than it is in semeach ha'medaber, but even higher than tzvah shamayim, than the heavenly hosts, which aren't even comprised of physical elements. They're purely spiritual. The lowest physical element has the highest revelation of Hashem. Yes.
This is what we're learning. Is this related to today's Tanya lesson?
No.
As far as like the Tanya Yomi?
No. I mean, everything relates to everything, but not.
We started at the beginning.
Yeah, we started at the beginning of the book, and this is what we're holding.
Weren't the Shari Nikano made of iron?
Sorry?
The Shari Nikano, weren't they made of iron?
Shari Nikno are made out of bronze.
Oh, bronze.
There's Zav, Kesef, Necheshes, and they were made out of Necheshes, and then there's Barzel. And Barzel was not allowed in the Beis Hamikdash. She'ein b'koichem v'yicholtam, and all the higher elements, and even in also in the heavenly hosts, they do not have the ability, lohetzi yeshmi ayin tamid, to constantly create something from nothing, ki yisoid ha'afar, like the element of earth, hamatzmiach tamid yeshmi ayin, which is constantly creating something from nothing. Him asafim v'yilandas, we're talking here about grass and trees. The ability to create something from nothing is something which is a unique property of the doimim, of the earth. And Alter Rebbe says very clearly, That ability of Yesh Mi'ayin does not exist in Medaber, it doesn't exist in Chai, it doesn't exist in Semeach, it doesn't exist. The angels can't create something from nothing. The earth creates something from nothing, and why is that? Because the greatest revelation, the revelation of the power of the Eir Sof to create Yesh Mi'ayin is specifically in the earth. And, interestingly, in a way this is even more so than we talk about Malchus of Atzilus. Malchus of Atzilus creates, but what does it create? It creates spiritual entities, the world of Bria. What creates, where is the koyach to create physical? That is in the earth.
What about man and animals that reproduce?
Right. Maybe we'll
I
talk
would
about...
also think that's Yesh Mi'ayin.
Right, right.
It's from a seed. It becomes a person. It becomes an animal.
Right. That's a good question. I'm not sure what the answer to that is. Let's finish today and
Okay.
see what... The Alter Rebbe is going to talk about it a lot, and maybe we'll come up with some answers to that question.
All right.
Okay? Now the Alter Rebbe is going to quote a Maimer Chazal. The Maimer Chazal that says that Ein lecha kol esav lamata she'ein lo yimazal lamayla shemake boi vo'imer gadel, which means that every single blade of grass down over here has a mazel, an angel above, shemake, that hits it. Obviously, you don't mean physically it hits it, but it's compelling it and says grow. So what do we see from that Maimer Chazal? That it's not only the earth that has the power to create Yesh Mi'ayin, we see Malachim also have the power to create Yesh Mi'ayin. So the Rebbe says, "V'mazel hamakev v'emer gadel," the mazel that hits the blade of grass and says it and tells it and instructs it to grow. Hainu la'achar shekvar samach ha'esav. This is after the blade of grass already grew out of the ground. Ve'enu emer le'letzmeach ma'ayin liyash. He doesn't say that it should sprout out of nothingness. Ella mekoiten legoidel. It's telling it grow larger. Velocis pri, and that it should. And it's telling that it should bear fruit. Kol min umin beprati pratius. Every single species according to its species. Avo beterem yitzmach. Before the blade of grass appears, limi yomer kol mazel lo mazel kol esav esav beprati pratius. Who's it speaking to? It says that there's a malach that hits it and instructs it to grow. What does that mean? There's already the grass, and it's instructing it to grow. So a malach can't create a blade of grass Yesh Mi'ayin, but the ability to create Yesh Mi'ayin is from the earth, and that is because of the koyach of the Eir Sof in it. So this is Makoyach Hatzemeach Shabai. This comes from the power, what's called the Koyach Hatzemeach, the power that the earth has to sprout forth vegetation. Shahu, that this power is ayin, veruchni, is ruchni, is spiritual, which relative to the physical is nothing. The haim and the grass and the vegetation is gashmim, is physical. So how does the physical come from a spiritual power? So we see over here that there is a special power within the doimem, within the earth, the special revelation of the Eir Sof. So we just moved it a step further. Last week, what were we saying in last class? We were saying that there is also a lakus, there's also godliness to be found within the world. Now we're saying not only is there godliness also in this world, actually the greatest revelation of the Eir Sof is not only in our world but in the lowest element of our world. That makes no sense. Why would that be the case? So the Rebbe is going to tell us two ideas. Why it is that the godliness is most apparent in the lowest element, and we'll do it first outside, and then we'll do it inside. The first thing that the Rebbe says, this is a highly kabbalistic idea, and if I'm going to tell you that I understand what I'm saying right now, I wouldn't be exactly 100% honest. But here's the idea: we know these are words that we've mentioned before. There's called igulim and there's called yosher. Igulim means the transcendent, the circle which surrounds all of existence. And then there's the eagle of the Eir Sof, and then within that eagle of the Eir Sof, there's the eagle of Ak, because Ak also has an eagle. And then there's the Yosher, there's the light that comes inside. Okay, so I want you to imagine that. So you have this big circle, and then you have from the top of the circle descends a column of light, and that light becomes less and less and less and less, until at the very bottom there's almost no light, right? And that's our world. But when you get to the very bottom, what are you closest to? The circle. The lowest element of our world is actually the closest to the eagle Hagadol, more so than anything which is above it.
It's the first stop, you say.
Sorry?
It's the first stop into the world.
No,
the
it's not,
Ark
it's
is
not the first time. But if you can envision this big circle, right?
Yeah,
We
where's
have
the
all
world
the
located?
worlds, and the world, right? Ours is the lowest world. What does that mean? That our world is really touching the circle from the bottom,
From the bottom.
right?
More than the top.
Sorry.
Not more than the top.
Okay. Now, so you talk about the highest level of Ak. So that's why the highest level is the Scala in the lowest. Where is the greatest revelation in the whole system? Okay, maybe with the exception, not Mamish on the top. The greatest revelation is going to be Taka
On the
in the
bottom.
Yesod offer in the lowest. You want to know, Dir B'Tachtleinim, what's special? That here you have the greatest revelation because it's right near the circle. Let's do this inside. And as I say every single time when we learn this, again, we're not talking about actual geometric shapes. It's all in concept. Now, what does that mean that in concept it's the closest to the circle? I don't know. But the Alter Rebbe is telling you the way it is with the way it works in geometry, and we just have to understand that for whatever reason, the same principles apply also in a spiritual sense. Now, how do we know that? Because everything in the physical is mishtalshel, comes from the spiritual. So if that's the way it's true, if you make a geometric illustration, then it must be that that's the way it also is true l'mayla. Let's do this inside. The Ein Zeis Ella, the reason why that you have the greatest revelation in the Yesod Ha'afar, it's only Mishum the Ragli Ak Mistayim Mitachlis Asiya. Mitachlis Asiya. The feet of Ak, which is, again, Ragli Ak is the feet of the Yosher of Ak, of the straight line that comes from Ak, ends underneath Asiya. Betachas Raglav, and under those feet, Meir Erin Seif Baruch Hu Seif Kalalman. What do you have? The revelation of the Erin Sof of Seif Kalalman that encompasses all the world, that transcendent light. Beli Hefzik Rab Bineim. There isn't very much of a separation between them. Rak Igule Aklavade. The only thing they have separating is the eagle of Ak, which, as we mentioned, you have the Erin Sof, and then you have the eagle of Ak. So basically, the only thing separating Yesod Offer from the Seif Kalalman is the eagle of Ak. That's one point. Then the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us another point, which is, and this is a concept called in Chassidus and Kabbalah, there's called Oyer Chayzer. There's two types of light. There's a Oyer Yashar. Oyer Yashar means a light that descends and comes straight, and then there's a Oyer Chayzer, which is, you might want to say, a rebounding light,
Reflex.
a reflecting light. So before we were saying that the reason the greatness of the lowest level is that it's near the eagle. So according to that, it turns out that if you're talking about the light that comes in straight, we're talking the lowest. But the only thing is that we happen to be close to the circle. Now the Alter Rebbe says, but if you're looking from the perspective of the rebounding light, actually the lowest level is where the light rebounds, and that's where it's very powerful. It's mushal that's brought down in Chassidus many times, is that we have over here in this world, we have sunlight, right? And as we know, we have heat from the sun also. Anyone who's walked out any time in the last few days, we know that we get heat, what? Heat from the sun, right? Very hot in the afternoon. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning after the sun, the heat of the sun has gone away, so you can get a little respite. But it's very hot. Right. Now, what happens if you went and you took a spaceship and you went up a few hundred miles up into the atmosphere? What would happen? So you would think, if over here it's light and it's hot, over there it would have to be even hotter and even lighter.
Closer to the sun.
Right. But what's the fact?
It's colder.
It's cold and it's dark. That makes no sense. So in Chassidus it is explained that you have three avirim. You have three, that there are three different, right near the sun, Taka, it's warm and hot. Don't try going there, okay? And then you have this whole area where it's the sun light and the heat of the sun is not so intense. But then when the sun, when the rays of the sun hit this earth, then you have the Oyer Chayzer, the reflection off the surface of the earth, and suddenly you get once again this intense light and intense heat. And that's a concept of Chassidus called Oyer Chayzer, which again, if you can ask
What
me,
does that what does the Oyer Chayzer represent?
More revelation of godliness, I think.
What you described that you have this big circle, and the light goes from the top to the bottom.
there's two things.
What is the light that's
different
reflecting?
things.
Where is it go? Where
Not
is
the
it?
circle. Not the circle.
Oh.
There's two. There's one thing is the circle. That's the infinite light of
Okay.
Hashem. Okay.
All right.
And that light, we're saying that the reason why we have special access to that light is because we're closest to it.
to the bottom.
Because we're on the bottom, right?
Right.
And how about the light that comes straight in, and that's the light that keeps on getting less and less and less? Says Alter Rebbe, that also, when it hits the bottom and rebounds up,
And where does it
suddenly
go?
there's
Where
this
does it go
incredible
back
power.
to?
It goes back up. Let's actually do this inside. You'll see what Alter
Why
Rebbe
would
says.
the Ak need it?
What?
The Ak provided the light, why would it go back to the Ark?
Well above my pay grade.
Oh,
Okay,
They
let's
should
but
pay
see
you-
what
they
Alter
should
Rebbe
pay you
says.
more.
It should, okay.
talk to the Ark. Talk to the Ark.
Let's do this inside.
The Ark's the boss.
Vigam. Rolling by Vigam. It's mamash halfway down from the top of the page. The first word in the line is Yigula.
Gamakav?
Yeah. Vigam hakav me'irin sof. Also the kav, which extends from the irin sof. Hamistayim b'siyum ragli ak, which ends right. We're not talking about the circle anymore. Now we're talking about the kav, which ends by the end of the feet of ak. Meir memata l'mayla. That once again illuminates from downwards upwards. Bebechinas er chazer. With a rebounding light. Kimoi, just like for example, Shahamalubish ba'arech anpin, that the light which is in arech anpin, which is in keser, va'ava, abba v'ima, which is chachman bina, v'zun da'atzilos, zachar nekeva, which is the midas and malchus of atzilus, meir ba'ir chayzer b'malchus da'atzilos, when it hits malchus da'atzilos, that also rebounds and illuminates upwards. U'malchus da'atzilos, we begin as keser memata l'mayla, malchus of atzilus becomes the crown. When you're working backwards, the end is always wedged in the beginning. The kacha, the same thing, the same thing is at the end of the line of light which extends from the Eirin Sof, Hamistayim, which ends Besiyum HaYesher Deragli Ak, which ends by the end of the line the light that extends from the feet of Ak, Meir B'Mata L'Mayla, so that rebounds and that illuminates upwards, lebechinas eir haneshama de malchus de asiya, and it enters the light of the neshama of malchus of asiya, which is the lowest level. Shehu alakus mamish, which is we already know the neshama is alakus, right? The chitzonius hakelim the malchus datzilus, because it comes from the chitzonius of the kelim of malchus datzilus. We talked about this in the past. Well, the fi mashin is bor b'sefer Gilgulman, based on what the Arizal writes in Sefer Gilgulman Perik Chaf. Who v'belukoti amar also brought down by the Alter Rebbe and Tanya in Perik Vav in Hagoah. This light of the kav enters the Eirin Sof of the Eirin Sof enters first ba'ir ha'atzilus shabasiya. It enters first the light of atzilus of asiya. Umimena lebriya v'yitzira shabasiya, and from there it goes to briya and sir and asiya. Umehen lebechinas eir neshama the malchus the asiya, and then it enters the malchus of asiya. A lot of Kabbalah over here. I mentioned to you what, but we're going through it, right?
Yeah.
Sasson, you're managing. Good.
Trying to.
The Sfardim are big into Kabbalah. Ashkenazim are busy catching up to the Sfardim in this
I
area.
was reading Zohar when I was 9 years old.
There we go.
Reading without understanding.
Okay, so we're continuing that. Yeah. I, at the very beginning of the Siman, for those of you who remember, I mentioned that Alter Rebbe wrote this letter the days before he passed away. And if you recall, I said that the letter is written almost as if Alter Rebbe is writing notes to himself. It's like, as opposed to, the other Prakim and Tanya, where Alter Rebbe is writing things and it's explained well and it's explained extensively. Like, over here, it's almost like these are his ideas that he's transcribing for himself, and we're almost like peeking into the Alter Rebbe's mind. I'm sure the Alter Rebbe understands everything we have over here, and we're left trying to figure out what we can. But basically, in very simple words, Alter Rebbe is saying over here that even though the light rebounds from the bottom, but when it's in the bottom, in the world of Asiya, it doesn't go from the bottom up in Asiya. In Asiya, which is the lowest world, it goes from the top down. The light first enters Atzilus of Asiya, which is Chachma of Asiya, and from there it goes to Bria of Asiya, which is Bina of Asiya, from there to Yitzir of Asiya, which is the Midas, and from there Asiya Shav Asiya, which is Malchus of Asiya. So for whatever reason, which I don't know why, even though that we're saying the light rebounds upwards, right? But when the light enters this world, it enters this lower world, but it enters from the top, and then goes all the way down, and then it rebounds upwards to the higher worlds from there. Okay. And by that, with this, we finish the Kabbalah. Just,
Now?
yeah, we're clear for the next few chapters. With that, we finish the Kabbalah. And through this, sorry.
Wait, which one?
4 lines from the bottom.
1, 2, 3, 4.
We did that. We had 4 lines on the bottom. And because of this tremendous revelation that there is, again, in the lowest element of the world of Asiya, Yesh koyach v'oiz, there is the power, Besiyum hakli, the malchus da Asiya should be Seder Afar. at the very lowest level of the Keli of Malchus of Asiya, which is within the element of earth. That revelation is what it says in Bereshis, Tache Aretz, that the earth should grow vegetation. And that is able to operate in this world forever and for all eternity. So earlier on today we said something special about Yisod HaOfar. The Dafka, the Yisod HaOfar, is able to create Yesh Mi'ayin. And now the Alter Rebbe is adding, it's something which is more than that. It's not only that the Yisod HaOfar can create Yesh Mi'ayin, it's an infinite power. How many trees can the earth grow? How much grass can the earth grow? How much wheat can the earth grow? An infinite amount. So here we're seeing the tremendous revelation. You know, we live in a world which is finite. So you think the earth, how much? Today we talk about renewable energy sources, right? Because the energy sources that we have are limited, right?
I would think it's not limited because there's only so much space on the earth. Even if you covered the whole earth with trees, there's a finite
I hear your
number.
question. Dr. Rebbe's going to address that. I'm going to address that.
Okay.
It's an infinite. The power of infinity in this earth, where does that come from? Obviously, that comes from because the Eir and Sof is in there. So because the Eir and Sof is in the earth, number one, it's able to produce Yesh Mi'ayin, literally create something out of nothing. And number two is that it can create an infinite amount. The Beginnis Ein Sof. This is something which extends forever, not only in the 6 days of creation. So, for example, you have in the 6 days of creation, Hashem said, "Let the water give forth fish and birds." Right? Or when Hashem said, "Let the earth give forth animals." So that's mechachma the malchus tasiyah. That comes from a higher level of malchus, not malchus of malchus. During the 7 days of creation, they're illuminated in this world. There was this light of the Eir Sof which caused this creation, and it was an undeserved kindness, which wasn't earned in any which way. That's the way it was on 6 days of creation. But now the earth continues to have that. Here we are 5,782 years later, the earth is still creating Yesh Mi'ayin. And the earth can give forth grass and trees, uperis and fruit, ma'ayin liyesh, from nothing to something, tamid, perpetually, midei shana b'shana, every single year, shume'ein b'chinas ein sof. This is similar literally to the Ein Sof. Why? If this world were to continue existing for tens of thousands of years, it would never stop. Meaning, yeah, there's a limited amount. Why? Because will the world last forever? But theoretically, as long as the earth is there, it can keep on producing. As I said, it's a renewable source. It never gets used up. And how is that possible that you have a physical entity which keeps on producing infinitely, but it's finite? And the reason why is because the Eir and Sof which is within it.
But the idea of Shemitah is that it isn't infinite, that you have to stop and allow the earth to refresh itself.
Okay, and then what happens next year?
Then you can.
So bottom line is this parcel of land, yeah, I might have to stop every 7th year.
Yeah.
But this parcel of land has the capacity to grow an infinite amount of produce. If this world were to last forever, yeah, I might have to stop every few years, but it has an infinite capacity.
As long as you stop.
Sorry?
Yeah, as long as you stop.
Okay. Okay, so here we have this idea of Mayin Nukvin, which we encountered earlier on this page, 4 lines from the top. Mem Nun is Mayin Nukvin, a concept which we've encountered in Tanya already. Mayin Nukvin means female waters. The opposite of Mayin Nukvin is a Kabbalistic term. The opposite of Mayin Nukvin is Mem Dalid, which stands for Mayin Dechurin, which means male waters. For those of you who are more familiar with Chassidic terminology, in Chassidus is referred to as Yisarusa de la Tata and Yisarusa de la Ela. So Mayin Dechurim, the male waters, is awakening from above, And Mayin Nukvin is the awakening from below. In general, water, everything that grows from water. Anything that created grows from water. So there's the idea that you have the male waters and the female waters. But sometimes you have the male waters is when something comes just from above. Hashem is the male in our relationship. And when we do our work, and our work elicits the bracha or hashpa from Hashem, that's called Mayin Nukvin. So here, in a similar sense, we have this idea over here also, is that we know that when it comes to growing, things that grow, some things grow wild, and some things are planted. Those things that are planted, that's called halo asman. That is called the female waters. In other words, there is an effort put into it, as opposed to a bracha that comes from above, which is unprovoked or unearned. So some things, v'heim azruim ha'netuim, there are those plants that are planted. V'af al pikein, nevertheless, even when you plant a tree or plant a grain, it's still yesh mi'ayin. Hey, what do you mean it's not yesh mi'ayin? I put in a seed. He says, well, second. Let's talk about when you plant a tree. So you throw an apple seed into the ground. This fruit that you get is yesh mi'ayin. Because the seed. What do I mean?
The seed is yesh.
You're saying no, it was caused by the seed, and you're already getting irritated. But let me explain for a second, okay? Give me a moment. If you didn't know anything about botany, you didn't know anything about things that grow, okay? And I handed you a little apple seed, and then I handed you an apple, and I said, "You see, from this, I can get this." What would you tell me?
Meshuggah, just like I said by a person.
Sorry, what?
Just like I said by a person, same thing by people. You see a grown person and you know where they came from, and you'll say the same thing as.
Okay, but hold that for a second.
Focusing on the
You're
growing.
still focused on your question.
Yeah,
but
I'm just using the parallel.
I understand that. We'll get to it. Yesh mi'ayin means that, as we explained many times, that when you look at the product, you're like, where did this come from? Now, the fact is, we say, yeah, of course, it's the source. Why? Because we are members of this world, and we are aware of the fact that if they throw a seed into the ground, that grows. So that almost became natural to us. But think about that for a second. Think about it for a second. You have this little seed over here, this little apple seed. Now, I'm asking you, please, to envision in your mind an apple seed, what it looks like, okay? And from this apple seed is coming not an apple. Not an apple. You are getting a tree with branches and leaves, and an infinite amount of apples are coming from this apple seed. And you tell me that's not yesh mi'ayin? Again, you're so used to it.
It's coming from a physical entity, though.
It's
The
the yesh
seed, the
mi'yesh.
seed is a physical entity, and the nutrients that are in the ground are a physical entity.
So I'm telling you, it's not coming from the physical entity. It's impossible to say that this physical entity, this little seed, gave birth to an infinite amount of fruit and a tree. What happens is the koyach hatzemeach, when you throw that seed into the ground, so the koyach hatzemeach responds and it grows you a tree, which is similar to the DNA of that. But to say that the tree comes from that seed and everything comes from that seed, what if I open up the seed, it's all there? That's ridiculous. It's yesh mi'ayin. There is no correlation between this seed. Again, yesh mi'ayin, again, remember we spoke about it. It's when there's a quantum leap between the cause and the effect. When I look at something and I say, oh, that's the cause, that's the effect, oh yeah, sure, that makes sense. The only reason why it makes sense to you is because you know that's what happens. You following what I'm saying? So in your mind, you're like, oh, so that suddenly that makes sense. The fact that it happens doesn't mean that it makes sense. It just means that it happens a lot.
In other words, the seed has no machshava of its own to do anything, and it's only the koach hatzomeach that causes it to grow.
It's the koyach, yes. It's the koyach hatzemeach which is in the ground, which is the, as he says, the maimer tashe aretz, the gili oir itself, which is in the ground. That therefore, when you throw in a seed, you have an infinite yield from that, which is yesh. Again, Yesh mi ayin. Ayin doesn't mean nothing. We were spoken about this many times. Right? When we say yesh mi ayin, who creates the world? Hashem. Is Hashem nothing? Yesh mi
But he's not a physical entity. That's the
Yesh mi ayin doesn't mean nothing. Ayin doesn't mean nothing. Yesh mi ayin means that you have a product with a quantum leap from its cause. We don't see the relation. We don't see the correlation. It's the opposite. Remember, we spoke about ilah v'ol. Ilah v'ol is a cause and effect. There's a very simple.
Daisy chain of
Right.
cause and effect.
Right. A chain of outcomes. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, again, if you grew up in a desert and you never saw anything growing, and I bought you this little seed, and I'm telling you, you throw this in the ground, you're going to get this 50-foot tree, which is going to grow you these apples every single year till the end of time, theoretically. You'd say the guy's nuts. You would literally say the guy. You'd say the person is
And if Hashem
needs
decides,
help.
and if Hashem decides there'll be a drought and the seed will produce nothing, the Koach HaSameach is turned off.
A constant God.
okay.
That's a
Which
divine
makes the
providence
point
of
that
God.
if you don't have the Koach HaSameach, you get nothing.
That means there wasn't rain. Next year it'll be rain. This Mekach is right back. There's certain elements that are needed for it to happen, and one of them is water. Let's continue inside. Shagar and Hanatuam. Again,
Seasons.
Sheldon, you're really you're getting thrown off by you're misunderstanding what Yesh mi ayin is.
Yeah, I am, because I think of it as there not being any physical thing that's.
So I'm telling you, that's not what Yesh mi ayin is. Yesh mi ayin is whenever you have a cause and effect, but there is zero correlation between them. There is no logical sequence that brings one to another. You can't look at this and say, oh, this is where it came from. Now, we could look at an apple and we know it came from a seed simply because we're used to it. But logically speaking, you would never make that inference. You would never look at an apple. Go back to the desert analogy. If someone tells you, here's an apple, where did you come from? Oh, look at that. That must have come from this little seed that was thrown into the ground. Where would you get that from? Ilah v'olul means everything, right? From Chachma Bina comes Das. From Das comes Chesed Gevura. Right? Cause and, simple cause and effect, right? You go to someone's house and you see that he's standing outside the house and the door's locked. You're like, you forgot it was your wife's birthday. Yeah, okay, very good. That's simple cause and effect, right? You look at something that happens and you know what the cause is. We don't have that. Koyach HaTzmeach means that there's something which is a quantum leap that happened over here. Let's do this inside. Even when you plant something, even when you plant a seed, it's still like yesh mi'ayin. Why? Because the planted seed, this is a little seed, and this is a fruit. And also take into consideration, the entire tree, together with the branches and the leaves. The same thing as when you talk about different types of vegetables or different types of, I don't know, what is zaroinim? Herbs? I'm not sure what the little translation of zaroinim is.
A little seed.
What?
A little seed.
No, zaroinim is not a seed. It's mini zaroinim. It's like, I don't know. Vegan b'mini tvua. Now, also the same thing when it comes to wheat. But the wheat is different. Why is wheat different? Because when I'm planting an apple tree, an orange tree, or an ester tree, I'm taking a seed, which is actually just a little piece of wood, and throwing it in, and there I get fruit. That's a clear yesh mi'ayin. With grain, however, how is that yesh mi'ayin? I'm actually taking a piece of grain and I'm throwing it in the ground, and it's giving me grain. So it would seem that over there maybe it's not yesh mi'ayin. He says no. Also, when it comes to grain, the idea of hundreds of garinin, who's what do you call it? Not stalks, the kernels. Hundreds of kernels of grain to come from one kernel. It's mamish like yesh mi'ayin. And certainly hakashin v'ashibalim. It's not only the grain doesn't only suddenly you throw in a kernel of wheat in the ground, and also what comes? You have the straw and the stalks. Where do they come from? The fruit that come through planting, which means through human effort. Meaning through planting. they are much more, they're better. They're better qualitatively ma'oilin me'alehen than fruit that grow by themselves wildly. Simply because of the power of the growth in the land. Shaba'ares. And from this we understand that the same system plays it out also in all the higher worlds. That what? That there's always light that comes into the worlds and into our world. But the light that comes through the human being planting, which is through doing mitzvahs, is a much greater light and much more qualitatively greater than any light that just comes, that grows wildly, so to say. As we know, that bringing down these lights into this world is the ultimate purpose of the creation of a person. Commission as Baba Makamacher as explained elsewhere. So at this point, what do we have? We talked about, if we need a recap, we spoke about how there's always the advantage in the very lowest level. In Atzilus, we spoke about how creation Yashmiayin is specifically in Malchus of Atzilus, and then we talked about how there's also godliness and Elikus in the entire system of worlds. And in the system of worlds, where is the ultimate revelation of godliness? In the Yesod of Doimim, in the Yesod of Afar. And Ritz Hashem, next week the Alter Rebbe is going to continue and say, and now we'll understand why we have to do mitzvahs begashmias. But we'll leave that in Ritz Hashem for next week. But before we conclude, so anyways, in terms of your question, I don't have an answer. For some reason, the Alter Rebbe is saying that this doesn't exist, that this exists only by in Doimim and not in Sin, and not in Chai and not in Medaber.
And he doesn't say this is only by Domim and
He does. Specifically says only by Doimim.
What all I meant is that he doesn't say, and don't think it's by the other thing.
He does.
All right, then.
He does. I'll show
you.
you.
Can show me the lesson for a moment.
Yes. Turn to page Kuf Lamed Beis. The top lines. With a tremendous gilui, more than Yesod Sal Yenim Imenu, more than the higher elements, which is Medaber and Chayin Sameach. V'gam Mitzvah Shemayim, more so even than the heavenly hosts. She'ein bekoichem b'yicholtem, all of the higher elements, and the heavenly hosts do not have the ability to create something from nothing. So that clearly excludes them.
Yeah.
Now you're going to say, so how is the process, what you call yesh mi'ayin, of planting when the ground gives out something? How is that more than the creation yesh mi'ayin of the birth of a child, or an animal? And I don't know the answer to that question.
It also comes from seed.
What?
Yeah, that's what
It's
I
also
said.
seed and egg fertilizing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, it's also
It's
it's
just
not
has
something
no
that you look
matter-
and you say that this is a natural. Right. I thought about this question before, and I maybe need to look a little more and see if it's
I mean,
addressed.
if I'm raising it, I assume one of the Rebbes raised it.
It's very possible. I'm going to try to remember.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to remember over the week to see if I can look into that. It's definitely a good question. So, in this week's Parsha, Parshas Devarim, so we have a pasuk. Moshe Rabbeinu. This is begins his monologue to Klal Yisrael. Right, it's the HaKodesh Shvat. Right, shortly before he passes away. Sorry.
No.
And he says, he gives the Yidden a bracha. He starts off close to the beginning, he gives the Yidden a bracha. He says, Hashem Elokeichem hir be'eschem, Hashem has made you numerous, v'hinchem hayem kicheichu yashamayim l'reiv, and today you are like the stars of the heaven. And then he says, Hashem Elokei Aviseichem Yosef Aleichem Kachem Elaf Pa'amim. Hashem, the God of your fathers, He should increase you and add on to you 1,000 times, 1,000-fold. V'yivarech eschem, and He should bless you kasher dibar lachem, as he assured you. So Rashi, quoting a Medrash, says over here, Yosef Aleichem Kachem Elaf Pa'amim, that Moshe says Hashem should add on you 1,000 times. Mashu v'yivarech eschem. So what do you mean you should bench you? Again, Moshe says Hashem should increase you 1,000-fold, and He should bench you, like He told you. What do you mean, and He should bench you? What more bracha is there? What?
That's Iberic, he says.
Yeah.
Superfluous.
Ella, rather, Amrullah Moshe, when Moshe said, Yosef Aleichem Kachem Elaf Pa'amim, Moshe said that Hashem should increase you 1,000 times over. So the Yidden told Moshe, Yidden are never happy. You think it's a beautiful bracha, right? The Yidden complained to Moshe and says, what do you mean? You're limiting our brachas. We should only we should increase 1,000-fold. Hashem already promised Avram, Asherim Yuchal Ish, Limnois, V'Gomer, then no one will ever be able to count you. What does that mean?
Infinite.
There will be an infinite amount of Yidden. So you're limiting us. You're limiting Hashem's bracha when you say 1,000 times. Amar lahem. So Moshe Rabbeinu told them, Zu mishalihi. Zu mishalihu. This bracha that you should increase 1,000-fold, that's my personal private bracha. And Hashem already bent you as He told you. So now the pasuk makes sense. Hashem Hashem should increase you 1,000-fold, and then He should bench you as He promised you. Sounds good, right? So the Rebbe speaks about this and asks a question. So imagine I came over to you with Sasson and I told you, okay, here, I'm giving you a gift. I'm going to give you some money. How much money you want to know? Infinite. Meaning I'm going to give you a bank card and there's no limit. Some credit cards have no limit, but this is not a credit card. This is a debit card. And there's no limit. How much money do you have? Infinite. It comes along then Sheldon and says, and you know what? I have $10 for you also. Here's $10. What are you going to tell Sheldon?
Take hack.
What do you give me $10 for? I have an infinite amount of money in the bank, and you're giving me your $10. And by the way, and what if he tells him to give you $1,000 or $1 million?
Same thing.
The same thing. Mach Shtois, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have an infinite amount, what do you need? What do you need? His $10 or his $1 million?
You got everything.
You have everything, right? Same thing over here. What does Moshe come to the Yidden and tells them, I'm going to give you a bracha that Hashem should, that you should increase 1,000-fold. Then Hashem is going to give you a bracha and that you should be infinite. Yidden at the Moshe, so who needs you? What's the point? What's the point of your bracha? In other words, the Yidden came to Moshe and said, we already have a bracha from Hashem. And what's Moshe answering? This is for me. What do you need it for? This is the Rebbe's habit, by the way. The Rebbe's habit was, we've spoken about this, to take beautiful, innocent-sounding Mamari Chazal, which no one ever thinks about twice, and poke holes in them. Like, what does this mean? Then the Rebbe points out, if you look in the Medrash, in Dvarim Rabbah, so the Medrash says over there, Hashem Elokei V'Yisechem Yosef Aleichem. So the Medrash says, what does it mean Yosef Aleichem? You should add. The Medrash says that the Birchosei Shel HaKodesh Baruch Hu, that when Hashem gives a bracha, Teisfasei Meruba Ala Iker. The Teisefes is more than the Iker. Meaning, the Medrash says, usually when you go and you give someone a tip is the Teisefes, right? How do you say a tip in Hebrew?
Tip.
A tip, not a There you go. Another word that we Americans stole from the Israelis. So, from the Hebrew. So, but in Hebrew, a Teisefes, right? In Lashon HaKodesh. So usually, the Teisefes is less than the Iker.
Sure.
Hashem is absolutely wrong. The Teisefes is, when Hashem gives you extra, the extra is even more. So the same thing over here. The Teisefes of Hashem, Moshe's bracha, the Iker is Elapam. And Hashem's bracha is Bligvul. So the Rebbe says, if Moshe's bracha is 1,000 times, and Hashem's bracha is Bligvul, how do you call Moshe's bracha the Iker?
It's a tough one.
It's the Tafel.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean it's the Iker?
Maybe they want to say that Moshe is human being and Hashem is not human being. So for human being, that's the Tosefet.
Okay, I think we might be going a little in that direction. The Rebbe says, what's our avodah here in this world? We talk our dir b'tachtoina means we need to be mamshech into this world. The highest madrigas of godliness, the Eir Insaf, which is the unlimited brachas of Hashem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our job. But how does that happen? So as we learned just now in Tanya, there's the Eir that comes by itself. And then there's the Eir that comes through Halah Asman. There's the stuff that grows wild, as we said, and then there's when you plant it, and when you plant it, it's much greater. You need to have the effort, the human effort, and then when you have the human effort, then the Eir of Bli Gvul comes and enters the Gvul, enters our reality. The mashal the Rabbi brings from that We say Makim Ha'aron Eini Min Hamida. We know the ultimate dira for Hashem is the Beis Hamikdash and the Kodesh HaKadosh. When Mashiach comes, the whole world will have that kind of revelation. We have that. What was so special about the Aron? So the Gemara tells us that Makim Ha'aron Eini Min Hamida. What does that mean? The Aron didn't take up any space. Meaning we know that the Kodesh HaKadosh was 20 amas wide. He stuck the Aron in the middle, and you measure from one end of the Aron to the wall 10 amas. From the other end of the Aron to the wall is also 10 amas, which means the Aron didn't take up any space. Wow, isn't that incredible? But there's something very important over here. How big was the Aron? 2.5 amas wide. And if it wasn't 2.5 amas wide, then it wasn't the Aron, because the Torah says that the Aron has to be 2.5 amas wide. So did the Aron take up space? Absolutely. If it didn't take up space, then it's not the Aron, then it doesn't have any Kedusha to it. It took up space. So the greatness of the Aron is not that it didn't take up space. Malachim also don't take up space. What is the greatness of the Aron? Is that it took up space and it didn't take up space at the same time. Which is, don't try to imagine that, because that's impossible to envision. But that's the greatness of it. That if you measure the Aron, it's 2.5. You measure the room, it's 20, and then you measure it from one side to the wall, it's 10, and the other side to the wall, it's also 10.
Had no space.
What does this mean? That symbolizes the idea of bringing the Bli Gvul into this world, into the Gvul of the world. And the Gvul stays Gvul, and it's also Bli Gvul. Nimna makes no sense, but that's what we're trying to do. And how does that happen? Only through our Avodah. Only when we plant. So yes, we need the bracha from Hashem. But you know how we get the bracha from Hashem? Through Moshe's bracha. You need the effort of a human being. You need the avodah of Lamata, and that draws down the bracha of Hashem. So you can't ask, why do we need Moshe's bracha? If we have Hashem's bracha enters Moshe's bracha. And that's why Moshe's bracha is called the Iker. And the bracha from Hashem, which comes down into it, is called the Tisafas, even though it's much greater. Because without Moshe's bracha, we have nothing. And this is a reflection of what we're speaking about in Tanya over here. That yes, we need to have there's this tremendous gilui of Hashem here in this world. But we want that gilui to be in a tremendous way. We have to do the planting. We have to do our avodah. Shabbos, everyone. And Mit Hashem, celebrate together with Mashiach on his birthday this year.
Beautiful, thank you.